my name is Puja Shah. I am an author and I'm in the written scene.
Hello and welcome to The Written Scene. My name is Adam Greenfield. I am the host, the producer, and a few other things with this one. I do the marketing too, which I'm really bad at, but I try. If you are new to the show, welcome. What we do here is we talk to authors and editors and publishers and anybody really in the literary scene about the path and process of writing. If you have been here before and you've listened, whether it's one or all 80-something episodes, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. Please tell your friends. Okay. There, now that that's out of the way, let's dive into today's episode. The guest today is someone I've known her name for years. I've seen it all around San Diego. Kristen Fogel from San Diego Writers Inc. has pointed out a few times that I really need to have her on here. So finally got to do it. So thank you, Puja, for being here.
Thank you.
So to start, is For My Sister your most recent book?
It is my most recent and my debut novel.
Debut novel. Okay, that's fun. How did that feel to write that first debut novel?
How did it feel? Okay, so that's a loaded question.
Not like therapy or anything, but
yeah, it felt amazing. It felt like I felt vulnerable. It felt like I put my baby out in the world. But yeah, it's out, and I love having it out in the world and sharing it with everyone.
Yeah. What were you surprised by any reactions from the book at all?
Yeah, I was surprised. The novel is actually it's based on a social justice topic on girls' rights in India, and I was surprised how well it was received by people who never really even thought about that,
cool.
and just how wide the reach has gone from being a women's fiction novel to having even men read it. Felt amazing. So yeah, those were the key surprises. I almost had like a specific book club niche in mind that I thought I'd be pitching this to, and everyone would really receive it. And then to be talking to other people who some of them said, I didn't even know about this, and I've never even been to India, or I don't really read books like this, but now I will. That's been amazing.
It's so cool to have that sort of impact as a writer. I'm curious. You've said you were a little surprised that people you didn't expect were reading it. Like, how was that a quick realization, or do you think that's something that's been happening over time? Like, how has this changed, and what do you think is the cause of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it was more of a slow progression.
Mm-hmm.
I would just start to see or hear people, leave a review or reach out to me or ask me to speak at a book club that I wouldn't normally be at.
Yeah.
One key example was a book club it was about 75 to 80-year-old women, and they had been reading a specific genre for a long time, more romance, more mainstream. And I met this woman, and it was her birthday. She was with her sister, and she said, I really want to read your book. And then I didn't know she would. I gave her my website, and months later I got a website inquiry, and she said, would you come speak at my book club, because we all really want to
cool.
see you. And when I got there, these are all women, like I mentioned, some of them said, we've never even, they were joking. They said, we usually have the food at the book club. We've never even tried Indian food.
That's funny.
I was laughing, but I thought, oh my gosh, this was so amazing and refreshing to speak to women older than me. And so they've been reading for so long. So that's just one example. And then really, I think the reason it can speak to so many people is because the story is about girls that are just like us, and the characters really speak for themselves and are relatable. And then I think that's how news spread. But yeah, the surprising is the word, but also it's not surprising in the way, I just think that's how the world works. We all connect to each other through word, through the written scene, and we're all connecting. So
were you intent on trying to create characters in a world that you are familiar with? Was that something you were thinking about?
Yeah, so the way I got into writing this book, I was overseas for work in my previous career, which is healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Where were you?
I was in Uganda at the time.
Cool. Wow, okay.
And I was there really in a hospital, but part of a girls' rights organization. I think I was fed up with my healthcare career in the US. I needed to, feel like I was making more of a change. And then when I was there, I just started listening to some of the stories these girls had.
Yeah.
And I started writing short stories, not necessarily based on anyone in particular there, but just on the feeling that they were evoking in me on what it could be like to be a girl as a second-class citizen in the world. And as an American woman, I felt different, and while also having the same nuances here in the US. And then my parents being born in India, when I went to do work in India the year after, I started feeling really connected to writing a story that took place in India after meeting some of the girls I worked with there. And when I got back, I had one story in particular. The characters are named Amla and Asya, and I titled the short story the first time Amla and Asya. And eventually I started writing it and building the manuscript out, and then I couldn't stop. So that's where that really came from. But
it's a good feeling too.
Yeah, it was like just there was more to these characters. So the characters really came from, I guess, inspiration from what I was feeling doing nonprofit work. However, it was a deep cultural, calling of mine to write about a story in India, and I guess explore that part of me as well.
Yeah. I love the video that was made for it. You don't see that a lot.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, as you know, we were talking about poetry before we started this podcast, and I love spoken word poetry. And it's throughout the book, one of the characters, her calling is poetry and how she actually finds freedom. Yeah. So I wanted something that paid tribute to her freedom, the poetry, as well as essentially mine, because that was my calling. And so I wrote this poem about the book, and then I really wanted to have a book trailer, and we know a really great friend of ours who puts together just beautiful, animation, and he was able to make that with my voice as your voice.
So that was your voice.
So that's my voice. Yeah.
It was so cool. I was doing some digging into it, and I saw that video, and I'm like, why doesn't every author do this? I know not every author has friends who are illustrators, I'm sure, or animators, but still, like, that's such a smart thing to do, especially with the tools that we have in technology these days. Why not do it?
Totally.
You know, I thought it was pretty smart.
Thank
pretty
you.
Cool thing. All right, let's go back to when you were younger and a kid. What were some of the books you were reading back then?
Yeah, so back then when I was a kid, I was obsessed. I remember with Catcher in the Rye. It was one of my first internal dialogue narrative books that just blew my mind.
Yeah.
And I read it for school. I remember reading it on my own again. I was like, I can't get enough of this book.
Yeah.
And then more of what really got me, I think, into the calling for social justice work as well within writing was Toni Morrison. The Bluest Eye was one of my favorite books as a kid. Yeah. I was in high school by then, and one of my teachers, when I was a senior in high school, this was the year that Black Boy got banned in some schools in the U.S. And I lived in New York, and he was a retired Columbia professor, and he said, there's no way we're not reading Black Boy. And he made it happen. And I think that was the first time I saw an educator really challenge the system. And that spoke to me in a way that I think as a kid, you don't see that often. And it spoke to me in a way that just blew my mind. I thought, well, here we are. I have to read this book now.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're like, oh, I have so much work to do. I ended up reading the book. And again, that was another book that just touched me deeply. And then nonfiction wise, I was really exploring, at the time I lived in New York, and I had taken a writing class when I was a junior in high school in Harlem at Barnard College. And I remember feeling really connected to the area, and Jonathan Cazole at the time had written Amazing Grace, I think. And it was around that time, a year or two later, that I started reading that. And so I definitely, those are the books that got me into understanding I wanted to write about topics that maybe people were not so called or free to talk about, just like what I talk about in For My Sister with girls and trafficking and generational poverty. And so, Yeah, that's how I started on my writing
In the
career
writing
with the
career,
books.
yeah.
Yeah.
Were there, when you first started writing all that stuff, did you have any fears of alienating people or like any of that concern?
For sure. And I think at the time I was also really connected to music.
Yeah.
So I grew up in the 90s in New York, and rap music was a big part of my life.
Yeah,
And so
yeah. I was
everyone,
on the East Coast. I was in Maryland at the
okay,
time, but I
so
remember those two.
yeah, like
Yeah,
Hot 97. And,
yeah.
I think it's a pre Spotify generation.
Yes.
And so I, those kind of topics were already being talked about in the mainstream.
That's
Like
true.
Tupac
Yeah.
was writing about the inequalities, and I started connecting with artists that felt like that. So I wasn't afraid of alienating. I think when I started to write about my own culture is when I started to feel it more.
Why do you think that?
I think it was more, there is, for first generation immigrants, there is this really strong need to assimilate and not necessarily talk about things that could be deemed as other or be judged on. And so I was kind of afraid when I came out for my sister, like, is everyone gonna, I mean, here I am loving yoga and meditation and teaching the fruits of Indian culture, really, if we think about that. But then I was talking about something, the sheer inequality that happens to girls still in India. I thought, well, now what? What is that going to feel like for people of my culture that are sometimes afraid to talk about that? And then I realized actually that is why I have to talk about it.
Yes,
And it just
yeah.
shifted. It was like especially when I can talk about it from the cultural standpoint of understanding the culture and understanding what it comes from versus, an outside lens of, well, this is wrong. This, it was more like, let me dig deep on why this is even happening.
Yeah.
And that shifted it.
I feel like that realization that you have to talk about it, that had to have been so powerful.
Yeah, it was also, I have a daughter, and I think I was like, if I don't talk about this, like, I have a kid, like, secondly, I have a daughter, like, I just couldn't. I couldn't. Yeah, I couldn't stay silent on something that I saw, and it's not even necessarily, the book is not necessarily on trafficking itself. It's really on humanizing the girls and women and anyone that has ever been subjected to anything that really we're afraid to talk about, but that is just not fair, and that is also just not our truest human nature, which is to connect and love. And so I started realizing if I can return it back to that, then that is really what all of this work is about.
Yeah. That's such a good realization. That's a really smart one. Did you start writing stories or poetry?
I started writing poetry.
Okay.
I wrote my first poem. I was 7 or 8 years old. That I recall. I
Did you
might have
recall?
before.
Yeah,
I
sure,
mean, who knows? But I had entered, our school had a contest, and my teacher, actually, I must have been writing well in other ways, said, I really want you to enter this contest. So I said, okay. And she had a couple of the kids in the class enter it, and I won. And it was a poem on, it started out as Beyond. It was called Beyond, and it was what was beyond the rainbow. And then I was like, beyond the rainbow is a pot of gold, and beyond your hopes lie your dreams. And just, it was really a whimsical poem. And I actually dug it up recently, and I was like, oh, this was fun to see, because a lot of my poetry was really dreamy as a kid, and it's like a reminder of a child's imagination and their heart and
freedom in a way.
Freedom, like how do you view the world?
Right.
And it's been wonderful to see some of my old poetry from then.
That's funny. I think I still have one of the first short stories I wrote when I was like 10. So yeah, it's fun to go back and look and see that it's been there all along.
Yeah, it's totally, and to recall even the teachers that really inspired me to do that. I thought of her, and then when I did start writing short stories, I had a teacher in high school. I don't even know if maybe one day she'll listen. Mrs. Basong. I don't know if she'll.
You should find her and tell her this.
Tell her that I did find one teacher, which was amazing, which I'll tell you about. But she used to say, "Hey, if you ever want to come in, this is when we only had certain number of computers, and she'd say, if you want to write on these computers, go ahead and come in anytime. And so sometimes at lunch I'd go in and she'd like turn it on, let
that's
me
fun.
do it.
So
It was
good
wonderful.
to have nice teachers like that.
Yeah, I got in touch with a teacher recently because I spoke at a college on Long Island. The one I went to Adelphi University for undergrad, and when I went, they had me at their book fair, and they had a big festival, and I spoke on a panel there, and I was signing books, and someone came up to me and said, I heard you said you went to this high school, and he named my high school, and he said, I'm actually a retired teacher there, and I don't know if you'll remember, and he named my teacher that was my advisor I was on the Martin Luther King Jr. Club.
Oh, cool.
And we used to do all this stuff after school on activism. And so I said, well, if you have he's like, I'm going to give him your book. And so I put my email down in the book. And after all these years, I got an email from my teacher, Mr. Board, or from that club. And we got to talk. We talked on the phone, and
cool.
It was so amazing. I'm like, that
He
was really
he
cool.
remembered you, yeah?
He totally did. I was like, I can't believe you remembered me. Yeah.
All those years, all those students.
It was amazing.
It really, I find the mind of teachers to be pretty fascinating sometimes.
Totally.
Just like how do you remember each student, the names alone?
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me, and I have such respect for teachers, good ones.
Yes, agreed. Agreed.
There are some that maybe
there are some that have been in the system too long, and
too
maybe
long.
they need a little help. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think along with a lot of writers, we have different paths to get there, and sometimes, actually, a lot of the time, it's not really in writing. You have a background in dentistry. Why did you choose dentistry over writing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think anyone that's listening that is a child of an immigrant, especially Asian immigrants, will relate to this. I actually did want to go into writing. I had told my parents, I had been winning all these national awards when I was in high school. I mean, they were my teachers, the chairperson of the English department of my school told my parents, you know what she's doing with her life. And they were like, what? Like they were so oblivious. In a really unique way. They had come to the country under the pretense of post-civil rights movement. They opened up the Immigration Amendment Act, and they said doctors, lawyers, and engineers from these countries are able to immigrate to America. And so when they were younger, and my parents both were in college at the time, their parents were like, oh my gosh, this is an opportunity for you to help our whole family, so pick one of these careers. And so my mom was actually this beautiful paint, like she still paints. It's like the most beautiful art I've ever seen.
Wow.
And I thought about that. I thought, well, imagine that's what she wanted to do, but here she was given this decision post-independence in India. You have an opportunity, and she took it, right? And so I thought about that. And so when I was like, I want to be a writer, they were like, that's a great hobby. You're doing so great. And, 17 years old, I was like, all right, fine. I'll keep doing my hobby, which actually I did keep doing. I was running to Gotham Writers Workshops in New York City during my residency. And I was doing all of this stuff because that was my heart and soul. And so sometimes I think it takes a while to realize what your heart and soul is, but it never leaves you,
Yeah. What both scares you and excites you about writing?
I think that putting my deepest work out there is sometimes scary. Because it's like, I think any type of writing, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, especially actually poetry, I'll share why there, because it's uninhibited, right? Like it just flows through. I think that sharing that with the world is scary because it's like my inside. And
it's your literal heart on a page.
It's my literal heart on a page. And then the exciting part is the same thing, because if I don't share what's inside, and if I don't really talk about it, then really I'm not doing a service to my work and my art and
yourself.
And myself. Yeah. So it's like it's a dual, dual narrative there.
Yeah, for sure. I know the reason I ask that particular question is because I'm curious how much the fear of not just rejection in the arts, but the lack of financial support in a way, if that played a role at all either, or if you just said, no, I think this one, I want to do this.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a piece of it. I have kids, and I think it took a while to say, hey, I'm leaving my corporate public health career to move into this. It took a lot of decision making on that end. And it's still not, as financially rewarding, obviously, right now. But I do believe it can be. And I do believe there's a path. And I do believe I'm in a different place in my life where because I have other decisions to play, to make, to play into the role and into the factor, it almost motivates me more. So, yeah. So I am definitely still on the path. And there are moments where sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, should I just
did I do the
get
right
a
thing?
quick day job?
Yeah.
And just but there's no judgment on either end, because I think we all are artists, just still sharing and being and breathing and living in this 3D reality of paying bills in the world. But we have this imagination that we know we want to get out and be in.
It's almost like an unbearable friend.
Yeah.
It's just like constantly you have to do it. Like I struggled. I've had many corporate jobs over the years. And to this day I still have a part-time job that I'm afraid to quit. Because that's a large chunk of income that I don't know how I would make in the arts. Fortunately, I can make a lot of my income on podcast production, but I just want to write.
Yeah,
that's all I want to do, Yeah. So I have to do these, and I've accepted that, as frustrating as some of it is. But I've also realized that a lot of the reason I didn't push as much as I did when I was younger was that fear of rejection and not being able to support myself. Which was drilled into me from my mother, because that was her generation. You work, you save money, that's what you do.
Yeah.
You play it safe in a way.
Yeah.
And the arts are not safe.
Yeah. The arts are not safe because the arts are a freedom that I think in society we sometimes, want to play safe, because it's just drilled into us that these jobs or these careers or the safer paths are the way to function. And I think that when I look at some of the greater artists that are inspiration, whether it's in writing or in music, I just watched the Bob Dylan documentary.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
Oh my gosh, it is phenomenal.
Is it? Yeah.
And it's almost
that's the one
like,
with Timothy Chalamet.
Yes,
yeah. Okay.
So good. And it's just about how he became the greatest songwriter at that time, and he, and I think when I tap into that part of it, it's like there's this intense belief. And I think that the thing that is why I teach mindfulness, because I think the thing we can really hone in on as creatives is consistently building that belief within ourselves. The more we build that, the more actually energetically we can open up to receive, to move forward, to reduce the limiting beliefs, to really create. And I think the more we create, the more we actually are functioning as artists, and the more that we steer away from that being, a unsafe option.
Yeah. Do you think accepting that you are a writer true and true is part of that awareness?
I think accepting I'm a writer, accepting just who I am.
Yeah.
So whether who I am shows up as writing, whether who I am shows up as wanting to perform poetry, whether who I am shows up as, as editing, I don't know, whatever it is that I'm doing that fulfills this part of me that nothing else in the world really fulfills. And I know, and we all know what that feels like. We all can feel it. Because once you feel it, it's really hard to go back. Just like you said, the friend that doesn't want to stop tapping your shoulder.
Yeah,
it's like,
It's just always there.
It's always there.
Always there.
Yeah.
Speaking of being, always there, how intentional are you about making time to write?
That is a great question, especially for everyone out there who has kids and works. It's a really hard balance. But what I've started to do is when I've started to create goals in mind. And that really happened when I started working on For My Sister. It almost was a shift. I worked on that book for, if I was to calculate the time I wrote the story to the time it published, it's it's well over a decade. And the reason for that is I didn't give it the time all the time. I was having kids in between. I was working full time. But when I did dedicate time to it, I did it every day.
Yeah.
And then when I couldn't, I didn't. And so now that I have stepped into this place for my second novel, I have been really intentional about carving out time.
Okay.
And carving out time doesn't always mean writing. It also means research, or it means if I have to interview someone, or if it means, outlining. I just make sure I'm spending some sort of time on the book.
Yeah.
And that just helps. It helps me stay in the flow, and it helps me stay in the lane.
Yeah.
And there are good days and bad days on that, and I'm okay with it. But I just know I have to keep it in mind.
In mind, yeah. This morning, I spent an hour just taking notes on a story for future edits.
Yeah.
And I was like, writing done.
Totally.
Like
exactly.
anything. Someone even said reading is writing.
Oh my gosh.
Like that, even that alone.
I agree. Like if you're reading and it like gets you into your zone.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Because you're staying in that place in yourself that feels like, okay, I'm doing it. Like you said, you felt accomplished, or you felt like I could quote unquote check it off, right?
Check it off. Yeah, off the list, off the to-do list, and I have multiples of those.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Do you ever feel, when you are trying to make time to write, do you ever feel like maybe you're forcing the issue and the words just aren't happening? And if so, what do you do to get past that?
Yeah, I do feel that way. Especially when I've come to a scene when I really want to move into the next part of the book.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
I'm
you're
just
ready
like,
to go.
Yeah,
You're
I'm
ready
like,
to be done.
okay, but I'm still here,
How do I get out of this room?
How do I stay? And then I'm like, do I just write the rest and just forget about it right now? And I've done that. I actually have done that. That's a great thing to do if you really can't, but it sometimes doesn't work. And so what I do is for me, it's breath work and meditation. So I will take time to just close my eyes, center, come into place. And for some people, meditation is taking a walk or, taking a bath, but really just coming into the present moment, because then I know I'm not where I don't want to be.
Right.
I'm where I want to be.
Right.
And so it's just trying to get to where I want to be. But hey, it is so hard when you're like stuck in a scene like that. And one of the other things I did recently, which is like, I started just doodling, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to move my pen. And I started doodling, and then I like there's this one scene in New York City in this book that I graffitied like something on my page.
Yeah.
And I thought, I was like, wait, maybe I could do something with this. And I just like got it wasn't much, but a little bit out. And I think and that's why when I mentioned the poetry, I think when we're writing fiction or we're working on a very specific piece, we get stuck in our head on what we want, how we want it, what we're supposed to come out with, what the outline says. And with poetry, there's no stuck in your head. You're just writing whatever flows, right? And so that is what I teach in my mindfulness writing class. We get to the flow state, and to get to the flow state, we have to get out of what we expect. And so that is what's helped me kind of move forward in some times like that.
Those expectations can often be difficult to get around. I know how I have my own expectations of not just my own writing, but just certain pieces in my writing, and I struggle sometimes with that line between just wanting to make it better and just really doing too much.
Yeah, totally.
And overthinking it. So,
overthinking. I over-edit.
I'm
like, what am I doing?
Do you know Leslie Ferguson?
No.
Okay. Her name comes up a lot in this podcast. Yeah. So I apologize to all the people who are like, shut up about Leslie Ferguson already. She's an amazing memoirist and fiction writer here in San Diego, and even a poet too. And she's a good friend, and we talk about writing all the time. And I sent her one of my stories last year, and she's like, this entire character and every scene she's in, just cut it. It's not needed. And I sat with that for a good 6-7 months, and I was like, I can't, like, I love this character, I've grown to, like, I created this person, and you tend to get involved in them. And this morning I was like, she's right, it's got to go,
Wow.
And it was really difficult to make that cut.
Yeah, it's like a grieving.
So, yeah. So there are times where you're just like, I don't want to do this, but I'm just going to do it and see what happens.
Can you offshoot her, like, to a new story?
Oh, that's a good, ooh.
Yeah.
You know what?
It's like a series,
That's a really good point, because she's actually not a fun, but she's a good character. And maybe she could be in a different story. I'll have to think
There you
about
go.
that.
I mean, I thought of that because my kids watch Young Sheldon.
Yeah. Okay.
And someone recently told me, Sheldon's from what's that other show?
Oh, Malcolm in the Middle?
Or one of the,
something like
or
that.
something.
Or
One of the
no,
other shows.
Big Bang Theory.
Big Bang Theory. Thank you. Yeah. And I said, I didn't realize that. And they're like, yeah, he's an offshoot of that. And I was like, oh my God, offshoot characters. I wrote it in my journal. I'm like, sometimes there are characters that are just like I love this kid Jay in my novel, who's just, he's the lessee boy. He delivers lessee to the girls, and he's like the sweetest, most gorgeous boy. Like, he's just, his heart is, he's just so loving, and I love him. But he's like very little. He's like this inch of a character in my book, and he speaks volumes. And I'm always like, one day I want to have Jay somewhere else.
So let me ask this then. Why wouldn't you put him more in the story as opposed to?
He was. I mean, he was. But I think the girls are the main characters,
right.
and he comes up later, like he's their chosen family. And but there's something about some characters, I think, like you just said about this one, you love them, but you have your main characters.
Exactly. Yeah, and they're not necessarily bringing the story with them. They're
right.
They can get in the way sometimes.
Right.
And it's hard to see that when you're writing it or even editing it. You need other eyes.
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
I had a long scene about how Jay got to how he became a Lessiwala, and we really had to cut it because it started like rambling, and then we had to cut. I mean, it's still there. People still know how he became who he is, but it was like I wanted more of him, and I realized that happens, and so I commend you for taking that.
It almost it's like you murdered a friend.
I know. You're like,
it's
wait,
so hard.
like, listen, you can resurrect her in a new place. Yeah,
you're absolutely. That is the joy of writing, is that we can resurrect things.
Yeah. Here we are.
You know what? I'm gonna have to put. I'll have to think about that. I'm gonna have to put her in another story and see where she fits, because I have other stories I need to write. So
there you go.
Maybe I'll just use her as the character.
There you go.
You have you also have some toes in the philanthropic world. Yeah,
I do. So I worked with the Girls' Rights Organization for a long time. It's called Girl Power Project, just like my child foundation. And then when I came out with the book, I got asked to speak on some stages that really were talking about girls' rights or topics on children's rights in India. And that just, it's amazing to see how my book can, inspire change, and also just to be able to talk about why I did what I did and write what I wrote about, and to share about why certain causes are really amazing and doing the work. And I always say this when I speak at book clubs, they're like, well, what can we do? And I said, listen, all I did was tell a story, but there are many people out there on the ground who are doing this tirelessly every day, advocating for children. And these are the places that you can work with. And so even just being able to work with these organizations, it allowed me to give readers an outlet. And actually, one of the readers, one of the books I went to, she said, you know what? I have not been, she was from India. She hadn't been since she was a toddler. And she said, and she's a woman, she's a, family. And she said, I want to take my family to India and volunteer. And she's planning that trip. So I thought, well,
that's great.
You know what? Here's an organization, see what happens.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just, I love staying in that world because it really just gives me connection to allow to keep doing more work,
Yeah, I was also going to ask if there was any benefit it had to your writing craft, being in that philanthropic place.
Yeah, I think that I always knew that I, wanted world peace as a kid.
Right.
So I was like, all of us.
Yeah.
I was probably, maybe I wish I was born in the 60s or 70s.
I still want it. I'm 50 and I still want it.
All right. So here we are.
Yeah.
And I think being in there just like keeps that part of my heart alive. So it just helps me write from that place, which I think is just what fuels my creativity. So,
yeah. I think empathy is also a good thing for a writer.
Yeah.
Just seeing other people experiencing different cultures and places, that's just, and doing what you can for as many people as you can. It's got to be super beneficial for an author in some way.
I think so. I think it's beneficial to all of us.
All of us. Yeah. That's very true. Very true. All right. let's talk a little bit about schedules. We were talking about being intentional to make time to write, but I know that you have a very busy schedule. You've jammed this in between 2 different appointments, which I appreciate. Thank you. But I am curious, when events or stuff like these podcast interviews crop up, do you try to make sure you're also not overloading your schedule with things, and adding in time for yourself as well?
Yeah, and I am very guilty of not doing that.
Yeah.
So what
I think
I've
we
done,
might all be there. Yeah.
what I've done is most nights I actually take a bath, and it's a very simple thing.
Sounds kind of nice, actually.
It's just like I like my kids go to bed, and I close the door and I take a bath. And what happens there is that I can either like do a meditation, or I can journal, or I can just like come out and feel just relaxed from my stressful day or whatever it is. And then on top of it, if I do have time for other things, I will. If I have time for yoga, if I have time to write, leisurely writing, not, if I have time.
Then intensive writing. Yeah.
Then I can do it. But that's been my one almost, I look forward to that every single night. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you are making that every night.
I had to. I think it came to a point where I was in burnout mode, and I'm like, what do I do? And I had to do it.
You had to do it. Yeah. Sometimes that self-preservation is all you need. You know, that sense of it. There are times where I will sit and I'll just zone out on a YouTube video or play a little baseball game on my phone,
Totally.
and just not think about anything.
Yeah.
And then I get done with that and I'm like, okay, I can do stuff now.
Yeah. I know. We're so quick to feel like guilty for not doing something.
Every night. So you take a bath at night. I go to bed and I'm like, oh, what didn't I do?
Well, and so I will. I'm like getting in the bath. I'm like, shoot, should I just put my laundry away? I'm like, no,
I need this bath.
Leave the laundry. Yeah.
It'll be there tomorrow. It's just fine. It might be a little wrinkly, but you'll be okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I try to be a bit more intentional with making time for myself, but I've had to get creative, and now that been in a relationship for a couple years now, and so there's another thing, that I got to factor into my time. And well, if we're going to do this on Saturday, I got to make sure I get all my writing done, Friday, because that all day Saturday we're doing this. I'm always curious how people divvy up their time for this sort of thing. So, yeah. When it comes to your personal writing space, do you need it to be clear of clutter, or does that matter to you? Someone who's probably focusing on awareness probably likes to have that space.
I think it's interesting when I'm like in the zone. Sometimes I could be anywhere. Like I could be on a plane. I could be, I don't know. I could be at a cafe. I could be in my office. But when I'm doing work, like I have to get this word count out. I'm working on this book. I actually do need things. I need a space, and either I have my desk, which I've kind of abandoned the last couple of months because I have this little kind of low to the ground sofa with little tiny table, and that has brought me such joy. I think because it's comfortable. All it is just a little table with my laptop and my pen and paper, and there's nothing else. Sometimes I'll light a candle, but there's nothing else. And
so it's a dedicated space for it.
It's a dedicated space. And I've like it energetically, when I go sit on there now, it's like, I know this is what I'm going to be doing.
It's like you enter into a little zone.
Yeah. It's like in a corner in my room. It's not really like a special, but it's for me, it feels like that. And so I do think when I'm working on something intentional like that, I need to have that. And it almost is just the same way as when I meditate. I sometimes, like if I'm in a flow of that, I can do it in a yoga studio. I could do it at the park. But when I'm needing it and creating it, anything I'm creating, I need to have space for.
Yeah. I as you can see, I've got a little clutter up here, but this desk used to be so much messier before I had that conclusion where I can't think clearly.
Yeah.
Like just the peripheral vision even is enough to make me turn my head away from what I'm doing.
Totally.
So I need to have it as clutter-free as possible.
That's probably why I abandoned my desk. It's turned into like I have drafts of things, and then I have also kids. I have some reason have all these schedules all over the desk, and I'm like, desk, goodbye. Like I can't do. So actually, your desk is inspiring me to clear mine out.
Clear yours. Okay. Well, if you stick with that, so your small table, that was actually inspiring me to do that.
Great.
So we're inspiring everybody today.
I love that.
All right. So at the San Diego Writers Festival panel I moderated, someone asked a question of what motivated authors. And I thought it was a really interesting question, especially the answers received. And it got to me, and my answer was the fear of time running out.
Mm.
Like that one really worries me these days because I spend a lot of my time not caring about life really until
Mm.
about 20 years ago. So, what I'm curious about is, do you ever experience your own writing path in that way, or are you a bit more patient with it?
I love that. So I did experience it. Um, there was something that happened during the pandemic for me. I had been working on this book. I had it halfway done actually, and I kind of put it to the side. And during the pandemic, I took it out. I wasn't traveling for work. I was usually in Sacramento or LA, and my kids were home from school, so we were just not going anywhere. And I started working on it again, and something happened where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be 40 soon and I don't have my book out. And I had constantly been writing in journals since I was, since I had had kids, like by the time I'm 40, I'm going to publish a book.
Yeah.
And it was like, it's almost like when people say they created a mind movie. I didn't really create anything like that. I would just like write it during my wish list of stuff, and when I'd go to these like meditation workshops or like, what do you envision? I'm like, I don't, and that's what I would write. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like I only have a little time. And so when you said the thing about the time, I was like, what do I do? So then I just started working on it. And it wasn't like I was trying to beat a clock, but I just felt some sort of like pressure and I had the time at home. So I thought, why not?
Why not? Yeah.
And I ended up finishing the manuscript. Like I literally stumbled out of bed one day and came down the stairs and I was like, am I done? And then I started working on editing. And so it moved me forward. The press for time moved me forward to actually then query and do all of that. And so I do agree with you on the time. Nowadays, what I start to feel is I don't have a little bit of pressure of time, but not so much. It's more about like I took so much time in my life to do work that while it was meaningful in public health and what I made it, it was not my soul's calling. And so now what I feel is, well, my time, I want it to be about that more than anything else. And of course, there's going to be moments where I'm content writing and it's not really my soul's calling, or I'm, making money that way or whatever it is. But I can't do that anymore. Is what it feels like.
Do you ever miss that? That freedom of just doing whatever?
Yeah, like I think you're right. Like, what does that feel like, right? Like it's a freedom. It's the childhood feeling. We were just talking about the poetry. Yeah, it doesn't matter. That is what, essentially that is what Bob Dylan was doing in that movie. True. If we come back to it, he's just so, but it's the same really, like, because I just don't want to live life without writing and using my craft as whatever my expression is.
It for me, I physically and mentally can feel it if I'm not writing. I get impatient and I get frustrated easily, and I get headaches sometimes, and my girlfriend will be like, have you written lately? I'll be like, no.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, right. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Oh, that's a good girlfriend.
Right? Yeah. But I can physically and mentally, like, I'm starting to feel it and see it now when I'm not being creative enough in my day,
Yeah.
So,
it's like medicine for your soul,
Very much. It's kind of the only medicine I need, really, if you think about it. But
there you go.
So let's go ahead and wrap up here. I have one question that I ask everybody. I'm curious what your answer is. So if there was one book or song or movie or anything creative you wish you wrote, what would it be?
Oh, that is a great question. If there was anything, and it could be any genre, right?
Anything. It could be a song. It could be a movie. It could be a book, a poem.
Yeah.
A line in a poem.
So I have always loved Phenomenal Woman, the poem.
I don't know that one. Wait.
Oh my gosh.
Why does that name sound familiar, actually?
By Maya Angelou.
Maya Angelou. Yeah. Okay.
And
somebody talked about her recently to me, and I think that poem as well.
It is just like it's like soul's work.
Okay.
And yeah, if I could have been that author of Phenomenal Woman, I think it would have comes straight out of my soul too.
Yeah.
So
Is that what drew you to that answer? Is the soul of it?
Yeah, like when you asked me the question, I'm like, well, what stirs my soul? And then I thought of that poem. So,
yeah. When you sit down to write, do you think about that sort of thing in mind? Do you have that in mind when you start, or even edit, or do you let other people worry about that sort of thing?
I think that whatever I write, and I learned this through For My Sister, is coming from a place that I actually don't even know why.
Yeah.
So when someone asked me, like, why did you write about this? I was like, I actually have no clue.
Yeah.
I wrote the story, it came out of me. And then I learned, actually, as I wrote the story, I learned about these characters who really were teaching me about myself. And so if I approach art that way, if I just let whatever comes out and then I just read it later and I understand it, it's actually my soul speaking, and it's telling me, giving me gifts about my own life that I need to know and understand.
Yeah.
And so then it just is like and then I'm speaking to people who may be reading it and feeling something in their soul, and then that like continues that cycle.
Okay.
So yeah, that's if I answered your question, I don't know, but that's what it is.
I think it did. I think you did. Yeah. You know, I've heard someone say that poetry is just an ongoing conversation with poets before us.
Yeah,
You know?
I love that.
And that's such a cool little sentiment to have, and it's a good feeling to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah.
You know, and just to go, I'm furthering this, you know, and I'm going to put it out there, and there's future poets out there that'll continue this conversation. And it's just, I love the thought of that.
Have you read A Creative Act, Way of Being by Rick Rubin?
No.
Oh my gosh. It is, everyone read this book. It is the most beautiful book on creativity.
Okay.
And one of the things he talks about is that when you put out your art, and when you put out an idea, even when you think of an idea and someone else is doing it, it's all a collective. We're all adding to the collective of this beautiful thought, of this beautiful creativity. There is nothing, it's endless. And so when we start to look at art that way, we are tapping into something, you know, outside of us, but in us. And it's just like this kind of what you said about like the continuation of conversation or a continuation of poetry. All of it inspires all of us, and over and over.
Who knew that Rick Rubin, the music producer,
I know,
was so on it?
Oh my God, he's so on it. Read the book. It's so good.
Okay, well, the book crawl is this weekend. You guys will probably hear this long after the book crawl, but I have added that to my list.
Oh,
so
awesome.
I'm gonna check that out. So, Puja, thank you for doing this. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad we got to do it.
This was so much fun. Thank you for having me.